Welcome to Talk Mental Health with Logan Noon. This is episode 46. We're going to be talking about kind of a grim subject today, mass murderers. I'm going to be talking about this with my great friend Diane Mintz, who's also a fellow mental health advocate. If this name sounds familiar, she has been on the podcast before. She was on episode 34. She is a bipolar disorder advocate down in Sacramento, California. She's an author. Be sure to check out her work. That's Diane Mintz. So today we're going to be talking about really how the mass murders are connected to mental illness, or at least how they're portrayed in the media, our feelings around that, and what we really think is one of the best solutions towards dealing with these kind of killings and tragedies. So thank you for tuning in. If you would like to be a supporter of this podcast, really one of the best ways that you can do that is to purchase the book that I just made with my great friend Richard Arreo. This book is available on Amazon. The name of this book is called Imperfect Balance. It's a collection of stories, 10 different stories of medical students who deal with mental health challenges and how they overcame those challenges either before medical school or during medical school to be successful students. So you can find that on my Instagram page, the link to that, or just go on Amazon and type in Logan Noon. And once again, thank you so much for tuning in. There we are recording. Diane, welcome to Talk Mental Health with Logan Noon. Recurring guest. I forget which episode you came on, but it was a great episode, and I'll make sure to post that when I advertise that. But Diane Mintz, we've known each other, I don't even know how long now.
6 years, maybe?
Yeah, it must have been... and it kind of actually goes along with what we're going to talk about today. Really, when Sandy Hook, I think, was at the end of 2012, that shooting. Yeah. And that's when I started my advocacy work. So I'm sure we met at the beginning of 2013. So yeah, probably about 6 years.
It was your birthday.
Oh, really? Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
You were speaking at the NAMI walk, and I came up to you because it was my daughter's birthday, and that's where we met. Yeah.
Oh, I do remember, and I remember we kind of discussed that quickly. And that was a very cool memory. I think that was one of the best speeches I've done, and you guys can find that on my YouTube page. Just search Logan Noon on YouTube. So Diane is a fellow advocate living down in Sacramento. But, since we last talked, I know you're doing kind of a million different things. So can you kind of tell the listeners what you are doing now?
I'm still with NAMI. I speak with NAMI in our own voice. I'm on the board there. I'm going to let my presidency at NAMI I had to get rid of something off my plate. So somebody else is going to be taking that on, but I'm still very involved with NAMI. We started with NAMI, I'll talk a little bit more about it later, but a FaithNet program. I don't know if you've heard of that before.
I have not, no.
Yeah. So that's the NAMI stuff. But in the meantime, my husband and I still have an IT company, and I took on another job. And I'm really excited about that one too, because it has to do with mental health. It's Great. Like my dream job.
And can you talk about that job yet, or is it before you actually have it, so we can't discuss it?
No. They hired me. I was a consultant, but they did hire on. The company's called Behavioral Health Concepts, and it's an organization that does quality reviews. It's a company hired to do the reviews of each county because of the state's contract to provide mental health and drug and substance abuse, programs. So I get to actually see, this is the amazing thing, what we've been working for and advocating for so long. I'm seeing how it's hitting the counties, and I get to be part of the quality review of that. And now my input is only I think it's the most important part.
Yeah.
As a beneficiary, as a person with mental health issues myself, and as a family member.
Okay. And so you're kind of assessing each county how well they're doing addressing their mental health concerns.
Correct.
That's awesome.
I get to go into places that provide the services and ask the people receiving the services, how is it going for you? And That's, it's amazing. And it varies greatly by county. And
Yeah.
so it just gives me hope that one day it is trickling down, and we still got a really, really long way to go. But,
well, and
we're trying.
I would be interested when did you start that position?
Just this year.
Oh, okay. Because maybe in our next episode, because I know we kind of already have a topic for this one, right? But maybe our next episode is kind of analyzing like socioeconomic impact on mental health. Because one thing I found about California, and I guess you could say this about a lot of places, but California in general, you have very affluent areas, and then it seems like you go 5 or 6 miles down the road in very, very poor areas right next to one another. So it'd be interesting to see, like, are those more affluent areas addressing their mental health better, or maybe not even, so that would be I think a very interesting conversation.
I would love to be able to talk about that. Yeah. Because I'm still assessing it myself. That's the thing. Yeah, so I've only been to a few counties, but
okay. It's follow up in maybe 6 months or something.
We'll do.
Yeah. So today our topic is a little grim, but it definitely has to do with what's going on in the news right now, and I think it's very important that we talk about it. We're going to be talking about mass shootings and mental illness, how those seem to be, of course, associated whenever you turn on the news. It seems like we only talk about, or at least in my eyes, the only time mental illness gets a lot of coverage is right after a mass shooting. And it really pisses me off, to be honest. And it was really, this same situation, Sandy Hook, 6 years ago or 7 years ago, whenever it was really the cause for me to get so angry that I needed to do something. It really makes me sad that in the 6 or 7 years that I've been an advocate, I can't really say what the government has done or if any changes or improvements have really been made. I think socially people are more able to talk about mental health, but from a legislative standpoint, I can't pinpoint anything. Maybe you know some more things than I do, but...
Nope, not on the big scale like that. No, I realized, that it's not going to happen from the big picture. It's just, it's not going to happen in a trickle down way. It's going to be a bottom up way of the things that we're doing and the way we're thinking about these things. In other words, when it does hit the media and social media, we've got to change our language. We got to educate people. Yeah. It's not, that connection is incorrect.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and I was watching a few videos this morning, kind of trying to just prep my brain for this conversation. And I think mental illness is like the easy scapegoat to blame after a mass shooting. Like, everyone wants to know, why did this happen? How could we prevent this kind of thing? Oh, the person must have been mentally ill, just insanely sick. How would a sane person do that? And I think the tough reality of what's going on is that it's not mental illness that kills people. Maybe there's a very small percentage where these people turn violent, but at the end of the day, it's mostly people who, quote unquote, are sane, who are thinking clearly, and this is premeditated. They have manifestos a lot of time. They seek advice online about their feelings of resentment towards certain portions of people, religious or ethnic, whatever it may be, and they act on those issues. And it's not the mentally ill people who are potentially acting on, delusions or hallucinations, right, and something like that. And so I want to be, and like you, I want to be as big a part of the conversation as I can to try to change the narrative that people with mental illness are sick, but they can get better and live fulfilling lives like me and you are doing right now.
And like I said, I think it has so much to do with language and the way we think and perceive things that, mental illness itself, is such a wide range of things. I mean, there are people out there, we can talk about all of us and our degree of wellness, right? I mean, you and I have a condition that we take medication for. So that's like a different category to me than So, and we're considered serious mental illness, or SMI, if you want to use the acronyms, right? But we're treated, so there should be the TSMI, as in somebody treated for a condition. So we're not dangerous. We're not, out of our minds. It's not a thing that we should correlate with, somebody who does a mass shooting. Now, if you ask me, anyone who kills anybody has some sort of mental illness, in the degree that that is not the right way of thinking. So if you want to call it something, call it something else that has to do with your mental state of mind. This is not right. Yeah. I don't care what it is. I don't care if it's a mass shooting. I don't care if you're, shooting your spouse for something or whatever. You know what I mean? It's just like, that is not well. Something is definitely wrong. But, as far as a
diagnosis in
the
diagnosis, DSM-5,
exactly, doesn't mean that it's that. No, it does not mean
there's not
that.
Like, so the DSM-5 for the listeners, that's a diagnostic statistical manual. We're in the 5th edition, I believe. So it's really kind of the bread and butter for therapists and psychiatrists to make diagnosis of mentally ill people. There are some controversies around that because, like we're talking about now, I think we all can agree that the people who are quote-unquote killers, of course, have something wrong with them. But right now, there is no diagnosis in the DSM that's like evil.
Right.
It's not, we can't put these labels like bipolar, anxiety, schizophrenia as those mass murderers, because at the end of the day, it is different. And
it is different.
I really liked this one video this morning, and I wanted to kind of, it was a TED Talk about mental illness and mass shooters, and it was Carmela Eppright. It was TEDx Greenville. And one thing she talked a lot about is how, in the court, there is, of course, a defense that I was acting because I am insane. I'm making a defense of criminally insane. And she talked a lot about delusions and hallucinations. And so that really made me think about, I had mostly delusions when I was in my manic episode. I remember thinking that the FBI was following me. I remember I unplugged my battery from my cell phone. It was that long ago that you could do that. I was afraid to go to my house. I was just kind of driving around aimlessly. And, I can certainly imagine and understand how those delusions, if they weren't properly treated, could eventually manifest themselves that, who knows, could of course lead to violence. I can understand that. But what she was talking about a lot is how these mass shooters, it seems like it's not necessarily a mentally ill problem, but it really is a resentment problem. And, at the end of the day, how I kind of feel it's not really a mental illness problem, but it's actually more a white male kind of issue. And it's just, it's not all, of course, I don't want to make any absolute definitions here, but a lot of these mass shooters are white men who were potentially bullied, and maybe they seek out comfort online, in racist organizations or anything. And then a lot of the time she talked about these mass shooters, it's really premeditated. They really think about how they want to go out about this murder, how they want to, what's the best way to do this. A lot of these people after the fact, in retrospect, they can look back on their social media history and see different things that's like, oh, that should have been a red flag that we didn't pick up on. And, that's of course not right. I want to help those people, but being a resentful white male with potentially racist beliefs is not a mental illness. Right.
You are so right. And that's what I've seen a lot of, people trying to make the correlation and connection of what is the cause and effect, and saying that it's mental illness is incorrect. It just is. It's not. And I hate that is affecting the stigma that is still, prevalent, that it's not a delusion that goes awry, because, for the most part, like you said, we had experienced those delusions, but most people don't have a violent delusion. In fact, all the people that I've spoken, shared the stage with, like, you and others, we've, talked about how we may feel so much despair that we want to die by suicide, it's because, the only violence we feel is not really violent. It's just wanting to end, the pain that's going on, but it's not outward, the things that's going on. It's not an outward thing. It's not the evil, the resentment, the everything that you're talking about here when it comes to these shootings. And, we're a lot of the videos and things people are writing about is trying to make a cause and effect sort of correlation. And, I think that it is basically, lack of connection and the isolation that people feel. If I had to boil it down to something, and you had mentioned TEDx, which makes us think of my friend, you are my friend, David Woods Bartley and his TEDx. And that's exactly what he talks about. He talks about, how the power of connection, that connection creates hope, and hope can save lives. So that's exactly what I think about in terms of what can we do to, make this change, because there are a lot of angry young white men. I mean, if you have to pick a group, that's basically
it's a reality. Yeah.
I mean, and I hate that the media wants to do that. They want to, first it was like, well, it's Muslims, and then it's like, okay, it's, it's guns, it's this, it's that. They want to have just like something, because we all want to fix that something, right? I mean, we want to find out what is the problem, and we're not going to fix it by taking guns away or any of those things, right? Yeah. I mean, but the only thing that we can do is have more connection, and that is at the root of a lot of mental illness as well. So there is a correlation there. That's the one thing we can do, and I feel like I want to empower people and not just be the talking heads that go round and round about, well, we have to change this law, and that's going to make it better. I just don't see that happening.
Yeah. And, after these tragedies, I quite frankly I think everybody actually is having ideas that we should act on. I think people like me and you who are mental illness advocates after these mass shootings are put in a very awkward position, because we, of course, want to fight that. I think the stigma is getting leaps and bounds better than it was. But then, of course, after every single mass shooting, we take 2 steps back kind of thing. Yeah. And, I also think as an advocate, we have to be mindful that I think it's really easy to say like, oh, mass shooters are not mentally ill. But, there is maybe a portion that some are. Yeah. And, right. I remember there was one patient we were working with that, violence and mental illness, it's not a majority. It's certainly not everybody, but it is a reality at times. And this one woman who we worked with, I remember I was shadowing a psychiatrist. She was so delusional and, just kind of out of her mind in one of her psychotic episodes that she ended up killing her parents and her cat in the process. Oh, yeah. It is a reality. I don't want to, sit here and say, oh, it never happens, and I think that's kind of the awkward dilemma that we find ourselves in. Right. So when Republicans talk about, it's not all Republicans, of course, it's some Democrats too, but it seems to be Republicans, oh, let's fund mental health. Democrats, let's get more gun control. I would love to do both. Yeah. Because I do think mental health, we of course need more funding. And one thing, I don't know, being that I'm in the depths of medical school, I try to convince everyone I know essentially to go into psychiatry, because I think it's going to be this amazing career. I think it's going to have a lot of freedom, a lot of changes. I think it's going to be really a great career for people. And I'm trying my best to, of course, convince people. However, medical school is extremely expensive. I'm going to graduate with about, I think, probably like $350,000 in student loan debt. It's quite terrifying. And there are some loan forgiveness programs, yada, yada, yada. But, long story short, it is very, very expensive. And if you look at mental health care, those sort of professions are paid much less than if you were to go into surgery, emergency room doctor. And so the reality of the situation is I try to convince a lot of my friends to go into this career, and they're like, well, why would I want to do the same amount of training but potentially earn 40% less money? You know, I want to pay off my loans. I, of course, want to reap the benefits of going through all of this. And I hope that the government can put more money into mental health care. I think all of the providers from the top down should be compensated more so we get higher quality individuals going into this field. We also need more research, better diagnostic tools. So I do agree with, quite frankly, the Republican narrative in some regards. Like, yes, fine, give us more mental health money.
Yeah, and congratulations for passing the board, by the way. I said that the first time I saw your face, but I want to put that on the podcast as well. I'm so proud of you. We knew that you were going to do this. Yeah, I mean, it's not fair, and I hope it does change. But the thing is, you know, it could, you know, so hang in there. You know, don't be discouraged about that. You know, the parody lies. You know,
it doesn't impact me, no matter really what the salary was. Like, I don't see myself going into any other career besides psychiatry.
It's your passion.
But I know some of my colleagues, of course, could be swayed by certain just other things. Yeah,
those things might change, because that's one thing I have seen so far going to the different counties is the fact that staffing is a problem. You know, the fact that, you know, the caseloads and everything had, you know, the demand just changed. Now the pendulum shifts. So suddenly it's like, yeah, we're going to offer more services, blah, blah. So who does that fall on? You know, the clinical people. So they're getting burned out. They're quitting. So they have to incentivize people getting into that and, you know, and produce more quality people like you. So I think it's going to change in that direction as well. So that's something that we definitely need. And hopefully, like from the top down, they are going to see this. In California, I think we've got a good leader in our mental health czar, Tom Insel. He came directly when he first got appointed to the NAMI California conference to talk to people there. So he's getting good input there. So, you know, I feel like things are going in the right direction. I guess is when we start looking at just the things that people spout out about, and it's kind of like the same old rhetoric, you know, after something like this happens. And I just got to stop listening to that, I guess, because it's like, if I'm listening to something that's just going to make me feel angry, that's not a good thing. That's what they're trying to do, is get like one group against another and make, you know, people angry. And I just think, like, you know, as advocates, the way we want to do things is just person to person. I mean, we connect with people. That's, you know, why you have the passion that you do, and me as well. And we want to see people flourish with their mental health. And I'm just thinking the simplest way to do that is to encourage connection more. You know, not to let people isolate. I remember a newscaster that, you know, was talking to a group after one of the shootings, and she actually referred to this individual and the people that he was hanging out with as freaks. You know, what good is that when, you know, respectable, you know, people we're supposed to respect are calling a group of people that are struggling socially or whatever it is they're struggling with as freaks? You know, who isn't going to make you, you know, what is that doing to a person's, you know, mental health if that's how we're looking at people? So
well, and it just is going to add to that what I talked about earlier, is kind of that resentment feeling that it seems that that's really, I feel, the stem of a lot of these sort of, you know, evil people. Yep,
we've kind of put them in that position. I mean, as a society, which you know, that's one thing that individually I think we could do something about. And then anyone who wants to get, you know, behind changing gun laws and changing, you know, putting more money into mental health, oh please, you know, we definitely need that. And, you know, incentivizing people getting into that field. You know, I always wanted, my daughter just graduated. I want to say a little thing about her, but I'm really proud of her, what she did for her senior project. She did something on mental health.
Oh,
she
wow.
did. They had to do something in their performance. It's a performance school, so she did a dance, and she spoke beforehand, and I got to speak in the middle, and it was so beautiful to see things expressed, in an art form, and to have it touch the school and the parents and everybody that came out in a way that we forget that we don't have the language to talk about this. This is like our first experience in getting to the gut level of things. Everything's been shoved under the rug, right? So I went in and did some workshops afterwards, and at first the kids didn't have a lot to talk about and the things that we share with NAMI and such. But then I said, did y'all go to that performance of Inside Out? And then suddenly they're just like, yeah, that's how I feel. That one with the, and they were describing how, it was expressed.
Was this performance videotaped?
Yeah.
Oh, I would love to check out that performance. It sounds wonderful. And potentially, of course, I'm sure the listeners would maybe want to see it too, because I think it would be very beneficial for them.
It is. And what was so hard, as often happens, the dance instructor's nephew had recently died by suicide. So it was a meaningful thing for her to be a part of it too, and for all the dancers. So it was a really big deal. But
well, I think
anyway, now
go ahead, Diane.
Go ahead. Sorry. No, go ahead.
Well, I think you bring up an interesting, we've been talking a lot about isolation. And I think it really almost kind of starts from the very young age, at schools. I think when I look at my, high school experience in particular, it was very easy for me to be included. I was an athlete, so, athletes in schools seem to be a little bit more included than some other aspects of school. And what I mean by that is, so I just finished my pediatric rotation. And, I try to talk to these kids. What do you like doing? Whatever. And my mother's an art teacher, so of course I seem to always find myself talking about art. And a lot of these schools didn't even have art programs anymore. And it's really, really sad. And it seems like they're cutting out all these things where, and I'm going to make, of course, some assumptions here, but maybe students who don't want to go into sports, maybe they like doing art more or music, whatever it may be. And now if we're cutting out those opportunities, those individuals are going to feel more and more isolated.
Right.
And then, you move outside of school when people are just working, 9 to 5, whatever it may be, that isolation is just only going to continue.
Absolutely. I've always had a thing about our education, like narrow road that is expected. Like everyone's pushed to go into college, and not everybody likes academics. Not everybody's a book person. Where do we get our construction and our welders and our, plumbers and all that? Those are skills.
Yeah. And
some people work with their hands, and that's their God-given skill. They're good at it. They can look at something, figure it out. You're not going to, get that person to get grades in algebra. That's not the way their brains are. We got to look at each individual's gifts and the way their brains are wired, and realize to push somebody into a path that they are not cut out for is going to lead them to failure and isolation and feeling bad about themselves.
Yeah.
I think we have to have a lot more opportunities for different career goals. And it just hasn't really happened like that yet. And like you said, taking away the art forms, there are very talented artsy people.
Yeah.
Very talented. My kid's school was amazing. And it was really a kind of thing where they get to flourish, because if you can be you, if you just, get into drama and art and just express yourself, it's just like all those kids there, I think, felt a lot more comfortable in their own skin, even though they had, didn't understand the verbiage of mental illness to be able to talk about how they felt. That was really a good self-exploring kind of environment to be in, instead of you go to this class, you open this book, and you're supposed to get an A. How do you, not everybody's cut out for that.
Yeah, and building these sense of communities, I think, is is something that I don't know exactly how it would go about, but it has to be a goal. I look at, I'm not a religious person. I am an atheist, but one of my favorite parts of church when I would go with my parents, it wasn't really the lessons that I was learning, but it was that sense of community that, you would have coffee hour after and just get to talk with people, and you did feel at least part of a community in your town. And one of my biggest complaints of kind of the atheist community, we don't exactly have an equivalent of that. It's there really should be, or some kind of thing, and it's, once again, I kind of even bring it back to, for me, it's how my sense of community oftentimes is, of course, through my schooling, my medical school friends. But, even before I was in medical school, I would play in community, men's league, or actually they were co-ed, like soccer teams and basketball teams and golf leagues, whatever it may be. But it's just so easy to build a sense of community around sports. But it might not be as easy to build a sense of community around other things.
No. It's true. And if you are a kid that doesn't get into sports or doesn't have that, connection anywhere, where is it? You're just looking for a place to belong. And if it's someplace online where it's just people who are angry and resentful and isolated, that's a terrible place.
Yeah.
And I'd like to talk to you on the podcast too about when the atheist part started, because that interests me as well, because that's a big deal. Like I was saying, with NAMI, we're getting into the faith net sort of thing, is whereas we are talking to places of worship, because I think making that connection of, like you said, how important that is to have a place of community and connection. That's a huge place. But that having faith is part of a person's mental health as well, because it's hard to think that if I'm the end all be all, what else is there when I get to the end of me? Mm-hmm. You have to have something else to reach out to. And if you're depending on other people will let you down as well. So it's, whatever that is, I got reconnected with the God of my understanding through AA, because it's very, find your way place. And so it's an important part of mental health to me. And I think that the psychiatric community is embracing that in some degree. It doesn't have to be a separate thing altogether. Like, this is how we look at it scientifically, and this is, go get your spiritual fix somewhere else. And the same thing is what we're trying to bring to the church, is they're saying, like, we can't mess with that stuff. That is doctor stuff. So we're going to send you over there. But they don't have a good understanding of mental illness as a medical condition. Mm-hmm. So what they do is, either you pray it away and you're going to be okay, and they don't address that. They just don't have a good understanding. We had somebody recently who's just, 20-year-old young woman whose parents wanted to get her exorcised for demons because of her schizophrenia. Mm-hmm. So it's like some of that old thinking is still going on. So we're, getting into places just to educate, what it really is, and, give them some basic information and have the opportunity for them to have groups and like the family to family that NAMI offers, and peer-to-peer, so that people, if you're talking 1 in 5, think of how many people that is in your average church or synagogue. It's a lot of people. And the Jewish community has been reaching out to us a lot. They're doing a lot. We've spoken there a lot. So
okay. Well, kind of changing subjects a little bit. I want to get your opinion on, kind of now the other side of it seems like this legislative argument after these shootings. So what is your opinion on gun control, and do you think there should be additional restrictions on individuals with mental illness, and what is your really opinion on that?
That's a tough one. I think if we try to go through the mental illness criteria, that's going to get too messy. There's no way.
Yeah. And I think then it's going to de-incentivize people to seek out care.
Oh, absolutely. I hadn't even thought about really scratching the surface of that one. That's terrible. That would be terrible. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we don't want to do that.
So do you think we should make gun control more, or what do you think should go on?
Well, I don't know. I don't think we can put a diagnosis situation into that, because that, like you said, will keep people from getting, that's just not the response that we want. All I think is that, what is the purpose of the guns of mass destruction? That's the only thing that I think, that's the big thing in these mass shootings. That is, I don't think our forefathers thought, we want to be able to protect ourselves with an AK-47 or whatever those, It's like, what do we have the right to have a bomb in every house? I mean, why do we need weapons of mass destruction?
Yeah.
You should have the right to protect yourself, your family, but we don't need those. That's as far as I, personally, that I think. But, further background checks, if they have had a history of violence, where they've done something with a weapon before, okay. But as far as having mental illness, no. I mean, my husband's never been violent in, where he should be not allowed to have a weapon. But certainly, with if they just did it based on a condition, we wouldn't be allowed to have one. So that's not right. That's not right.
Yeah, and I really do agree with you there. I really think that the only necessity for guns would be if you want to protect your home, a conceal and carry, maybe little pistol, and of course maybe hunting. But all of those things, are not these automatic weapons that can fire off, 100 rounds in less than a minute or whatever it may be. I'm not very gun literate, if that's the right term. I think I've shot a gun less than maybe 5 or 6 times in my entire life. But I also look at it as I would love to see background checks, but also, I used to be a driver's ed instructor. And what I don't understand is I think there should be an extensive training program for obtaining a gun. Certain classes that you are required to absolutely go through to use this. I was laughing the other day. My buddy went to rent a boat, and he had to go through like a 12-hour long online training program just so he could get his boating license to rent a boat for one day. Yet buying a gun, you can kind of just go do it. And of course you can get injured on a boat. I'm not saying that you can't, but like there should be something very equivalent and also much more extensive, in my opinion, of figuring out exactly how to handle that weapon.
Absolutely.
And I just think, I agree with you. There shouldn't be kind of this mental illness portion of obtaining a gun. I don't think there should be like a background if ever you've had any instances with a gun. Because, like we were talking about earlier, a lot of these violent acts aren't committed by people who have a diagnosed mental illness.
Right.
It's these sane people who have been thinking about it for a while, typically writing, I use the word manifesto a lot, about why they want to do this, why they feel these people deserve to die, kind of thing.
Right.
So we should make it as challenging as possible to those people to access any kind of weapon. But I think we need to be mindful that, even if we were to take away all the kind of guns that are out there, these evil individuals could find ways to make any kind of harmful thing, whether that be a bomb or whatever it may be. It's just, we need to, I think what we were talking about earlier, include people, like getting at the root of the problem, that isolation, that resentment, I think is really the way to go about this. So another thing I want to get your opinion on, which is kind of another talking point that we hear a lot about in the news, and I have a lot of opinions on this. They say, video games are the root of these killings, which I'm going to rant about, but I'll let you speak first.
Oh, I want to hear your rant. Well, I have a son who's really into that, so it's a common thing, I guess it's been a different scenario from 20, 30 years ago, but we've had these things 20 or 30 years ago too. Unabomber didn't have video games to entice him to do things, but it's probably a factor in some people's mentality. But again, like you're saying, you're not going to take away if you take away this or restrict this, it's not going to stop it. So if that's the line of thinking, that's not going to help. But again, I don't think it is in terms of thinking mentally healthy. It is not mentally healthy to be that addicted, if you were, to gaming. It's
Certainly.
it's isolating. It's, if you're thinking about trying to have a healthy balance of things, it is not healthy. And I see, where people are getting treated for that because it is a dopamine factor. It is it does.
And that certainly makes sense. But I think the video games, like, we're not talking about someone being addicted to a football game or a basketball game. It seems like they're only talking about the violent video games kind of thing.
Right. They're looking cause and effect. But, certainly if your life is spent looking at shooting over and over and over and over, it's planted in your head in some ways. You're not watching, picking flowers or something and decide, you know what I mean? I mean, there's got to be something where it's registering in some people's brains. And, I don't know about the cause and effect. We're always looking at that. Is it a factor? Probably. What do you think?
I have strong opinions on this because I think
Let's hear it.
I think it's a stupid argument.
Okay.
I mean, when we look at Grand Theft Auto, which is, are you familiar with Grand Theft Auto, the video game? Yeah, it is a violent video game. I'm not going to deny that. You're going around, you're stealing cars, it's whatever. But, when the manufacturer Rockstar Game makes that game, they're not just selling to the United States. They're selling that game worldwide. So if you want to say video games is the cause of these mass shootings, why aren't we seeing these mass shootings everywhere? No, this is an America problem. This is a access to gun kind of thing. It's not the video games. And I just think it's such a stupid argument to say that it's these video games that are causing this. And I get that maybe it's making these people more comfortable with the idea of violence, but let's imagine a world that there was no video games whatsoever. Are we going to say the cause of mass shootings is movies that have a gun in it, a war movie?
See,
where does this end? It's like, look, these are fantasies that, it's playing a game or watching a movie is not going to cause you to go out and shoot 30 people. I think that is an absolute ridiculous argument. These games are sold all over the world and so many people play them. I have played them and it doesn't cause me to go out and beat my wife or kick my dog, it's just, I think it's just really, really unfair. And it's just, definitely, I think talking about video games as an addiction, I 100% agree with that. And I think that's a whole nother kind of conversation. But saying that the violence in video games is causing the violence in real life, I think is very unfair.
I agree. Well, that's why it's just, the arguments and the fact that we're spending, spending time arguing amongst ourselves about, no, it's this, no, it's guns, no, it's video games, no, it's mental illness. It's all of these things, and it cannot actually be one of them. You know what I mean? There's truth to all of it, but for us all to be kind of, well, maybe it's okay to have the conversation about it, of course, but you know what I mean? But to deny one or the other in lieu of trying to do something about it, and like what I said, connection and all that makes a difference. Because if you add the connection part, if you lessen the isolation, that little ingredient, that tiny expression of connecting takes away from those problems just a little bit. Because the fact is, our world is not going to change. It's not going to go backwards. We're not going to take away video games. That's just the way of our world now.
Well, and I think the worst part of the video game isn't even necessarily, well, let me preface this with, I don't think that a kindergartner should be playing Grand Theft Auto. Let's all agree on that. There are, of course, some inappropriate games for certain ages. But like I said, age appropriate, I don't think it's going to incite you to go out and kill people just crazy.
But you have the right, you have a good mental health attitude. Now, to somebody who is in a fragile state, it might affect them. You know what I mean?
I mean, potentially, but then are they not allowed to watch TV or listen to music or, anything like that? I think that argument can just go down a rabbit hole kind of thing.
I know. You can't legislate any of that.
Well, I think the worst part of video games, though, I mean, the content of the video game is one thing, but, the fact that video games now, nobody goes to an arcade anymore to go play a video game. Everyone is at their house alone. Of course, sometimes you can play online and talk to people, but I don't think that's enough. I would love to see just some ways that maybe like even the town, the same way that a town sponsors a soccer tournament, why don't we sponsor a video game tournament and at least bring people? Yeah. Oh, they do? Okay. Well, I guess I'm too old to realize these things, but just ways to bring more people together, to get people out of their house kind of thing. Right. I know there was some big tournament where some like 14-year-old won $3 million, but I just think things like that, just help bring people together and maybe cut out these isolation factors that people deal with.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that is just the key thing. So it all factors into, if you look at the population of the, primarily white males of all these shootings and even violence overall. I think I read some statistic that 90% of them are white males, just in general. So, we're just big on those statistics, and most of them do play it's not that it is that. Just the fact is that's kind of part of our society now. Mm-hmm. And the other part is, and I want to get your opinion on this, is cannabis. I mean, I remember years ago, I spoke at a dual diagnosis conference, and there was a doctor there, Dr. Norman S. Miller, who his topic was cannabis and violence. Mm-hmm. So he had pinpointed that.
Was that the guy that wrote the article in the New York Times?
Maybe. I don't know. I've read some different ones. But it's just like, again, always looking for some sort of correlation between this and that, right? Mm-hmm. But you can, it's like you can make this assumption that a lot of these people, that is their background as well. So to you as a doctor, I would love, that's what I was going to say, is my daughter's actually now graduated. She's going to go to UCLA to study neuroscience.
Oh, great.
Yes.
Wow. Very cool.
Yeah.
Well,
Very
I mean,
cool.
I certainly think it's possible. I'm not going to say it's impossible. And of course, if cannabis pushes, or marijuana, if you don't understand that word, marijuana can cause someone to go into a psychotic state. Of course, someone in a psychotic state could be violent. And, like we talked about earlier, it's a very minority of people who are... who commit these mass murders are, psychotic, but it's not impossible. So it could be a factor. I'm not saying that. I also think that correlation is not causation. Right. Those are two totally different things. And then if we take a step back and just kind of look at the whole of recreational drug use, how much more violent acts are committed by someone who's drunk versus somebody who's high? Right. And so I kind of look at it the lesser of two evils. I would much rather deal with a patient that is, stoned out of their mind than someone that's very drunk, that I literally would be concerned about my safety or the safety. I envision myself in a psych ward in the future, the safety of my nurses, my fellow therapists, versus somebody who is stoned on marijuana, and also there's a lot of psychotic breaks that are with methamphetamine. Those individuals can have psychosis at a much higher rate and become violent much, much more frequently. And so I just think, saying marijuana, it's certainly possible, but I really just think it should be, can drugs be a factor in violence? Like, yes, absolutely. And certain drugs worse than others. If we look at someone who is on heroin, it's highly unlikely that person is going to have the energy to go be violent necessarily as much. So I just think, if we're going to talk about marijuana, let's talk about all of them kind of thing. So that's really my stance.
That's the one I understand. I from what you're saying, I hear something that I think I can recognize in a lot of these arguments, as it were. I think when we look at the factors, that they are a number of factors, kind of like probably a perfect storm of incidents, that each of these individuals have at least probably a few of these going on, right? I mean, it's not just a person that's grown up in a wonderful home and has never smoked pot and has never done a video game and has, relationships with, has a BFF that they go out and do sports with. It's not that kind of a person, right? I mean, there's probably a number of things. And, I would say, oh, here's the other correlation. Somebody else had also put down that all these individuals have been on this and that psychotropic medication. So now they're trying to say, of course, that it's the psychotropic medication that is causing. See, It's not, you can't just do that. You can't just say this is the reason why, because it's not that, right? But, the correlation could be, well, a lot of them are on, like, say, Prozac. Well, they're depressed. So I think that, I think it's more likely that, yes, they're depressed. Yes, they're isolated. Yes, they're sitting playing video games. Yes, they're smoking pot. It's kind of like most likely a lot of those things. And, according to the studies here, I've got tons of them about the incident of the more potent cannabis causing the psychosis, that a lot of people would not have had schizophrenia if there wasn't that precipice. It's not like the idea of smoking pot will cause schizophrenia. So like the average person will just do it and boom, they're schizophrenic. But if they've got that predisposition, yes, it's possible. So again, we're talking about each individual and how they respond to it. But us as human beings, what we get afraid of is, well, if you say that's a problem, if you're saying this is causing a mass murder, then you're going to take away either my guns, am I right? You're going to take away my video games. You're going to say I can't smoke pot anymore. We get afraid that, it's going to affect me and my freedoms. Where in fact, if you are if you're a mentally well person, whether you are, you've never had any mental illness in your family, you don't abuse drugs or alcohol, you're able to take care of your life and your family and whatever it is, you've got, relationships, none of these things should be a factor. But if you are, if you've got, an ACE score, your, adverse childhood experience, you've got trauma, you've got all kinds of things that you're, fighting up against, your whole life is an uphill battle. And then you add smoking pot to the mix, you've got mental health issues in your family, it sparks, all these things. And then it all steamrolls, it becomes all of those factors. So that's my, my thinking on why we don't want to say, oh, it's this, or no, it absolutely can't be that, because I don't want you to blame my thing. I don't want you to blame mental illness. But like you said, there are some people with mental illness that have that violent thought.
Yeah.
I did have one guy in our Placer County Speakers Bureau. We get very honest. We're authentic people. We share about our experience, and he's been sober a number of years and has a stable girlfriend who was in there too, that has helped him with his mental health issues. But he said when he was very psychotic, he did have homicidal thoughts. Almost everyone else I ever heard speak said, they had suicidal thoughts when things were really bad. He had that, and that's the first time I ever heard that. So,
and that's a difficult thing to say
admit
publicly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I commend him for doing that.
Yeah. So that's, and it could, I was wanting to talk to him for hours after that. It's like, why is that? What is your upbringing? Why did you, what do those thoughts stem from? But, like you said, you can play those games for your whole life and you'd never have those thoughts. But some people do. So go figure.
Yeah. Well, I think all the ideas that are proposed aren't necessarily bad, and even talking about video games, I think I think, on those violent video games, it says rated M, same as kind of rated R movies.
Right.
17 and older. Now, are only 17 ages and older actually playing that video game? No, definitely not. So I would like to see I'd like to see those laws a little bit more forcefully enacted, kind of thing. I think that is really my stance on at least the video games. And I think that really all the ideas that are being proposed in government, I haven't really heard bad ideas necessarily. Maybe some, but it's just I get just so frustrated and so pissed off that nothing happens. Right. So hopefully that this conversation maybe can nudge a few listeners in the right direction to maybe call up their representatives and get some change. I would love to see more representatives actually identify as some people who live with mental illness, because I think those would create better sort of laws. So Diane Mintz, 2020. I mean, come on, let's add you to the list. We got enough candidates. Yeah.
I don't like politics at all. I don't. Gosh. Yeah. But what I would like to see too, along with enforcing those video games, is a warning label on cannabis. Because clearly, I'm not discounting people who use it recreationally, because some people can. Some people can have a glass of wine and whatever. I can't. I've got the addictive gene. I've been sober 20-something years. I know that, it is my genetic, my brain says I need more. Our son, when he started smoking pot, said, I need more. And he got addicted to it for 5 years. Mm-hmm. So there are people who cannot do things recreationally. There are people who can't do things in moderation. We don't know what that means. So I would like some sort of warning on things that say could be addictive, and also for pot that it would that it could cause psychosis in a certain population. I think it's fair to have that kind of warning like you would on cigarettes, that it could cause cancer, because the facts are there, the science is there. I think we need that because people aren't aware.
Yeah, and I'm glad that's what you would want to say on the label, and I think that's very fair, and I would totally agree with that. And I myself, as a future physician, I would like to study cannabis and marijuana, just because I feel we don't understand the harmful effects, and we don't even understand the benefits. We just simply don't understand enough of this because it's federally classified as a drug that has no medicinal value. So doing research on it is extremely difficult. And like you talked about, we might understand some of the negative ramifications because we've studied it as a recreational drug for so long, but it's kind of analogous to okay, we were studying the equivalent of beer in the 70s, and now we're dealing with, high potency vodka kind of thing, 151 vodka. It is much, much more potent. It's much easier to get a higher portion of THC into your body much more quickly. So I want to learn about all of this, and I think that there is a lot to be learned and a lot that we can help society out with, because I kind of look at it, the cat's out of the bag. More states are legalizing it. There is kind of a whole economy booming in this industry, but I really think that the government is doing a disservice that, we're allowing these businesses to go, which I support. I do think it should happen, but we don't understand it fully. So I really hope the federal government kind of gets their act together, and just allows science to just really get on this and figure out, okay, how can this help? Which potential quantities, which potential strains are going to be the most harmful, and those are the ones maybe we should pull off the market.
Yeah. Well, it's I guess you're right, by them not going on board, they're saying the cat is out of the bag, most of the country, just get along, go with it, so that you can study it. I never thought of that aspect of it, but how ridiculous
it's extremely frustrating. In medical school curriculum, myself and colleagues would ask questions about this, and our professors at least legally couldn't answer because they say, well, we are a federally sponsored school. We don't understand. This isn't accepted by the American Association of Medicine, so we certainly don't know everything about this sort of plan.
Wow, that's terrible.
Yeah,
that's terrible.
It's extremely frustrating to learn because then I have to do a lot of the education on my own. And I think that there are a lot of positives and negatives to this that need to be explored.
Yeah, like most things, all of these things that we're talking about, actually, because it's like, same thing. Guns in the right hands protect. Guns in the wrong hands hurt. Marijuana in a casual user could just be, is totally, like a glass of wine. In the wrong hands, not good. So, it's the same sort of thing. I did read, though, that there have been 24 mass shootings in Colorado in the past 6 years since it's been legal. So there's...
But once again, that's correlation.
It cannot be the correlation.
And,
it's not necessarily...
It's certainly not necessarily, but also, I mean, you could factor in how many more people have moved to Colorado in the last 6 years, and you could say that's because of marijuana, certainly.
Right.
But the housing market is going way up. I know friends who own property in those areas, and they've had a lot of increases in their homes. So okay, is there more mass shootings? But is there more mass shootings per capita, kind of thing?
I don't know.
Those are the kind of things, and I would want to dive in further because, I consider myself a scientist, so I really do try to reject everything that has to do with correlation because I think it's unfair to make conclusions based off of that. And so
I hear you.
I would like to, like I said, I would love to do more research kind of into this before we make any kind of conclusion.
Yep. I've just been reading the articles trying to get up to speed on what the arguments are out there, and that is one of them. And the fact that marijuana is the drug most often linked to crime in the United States. Now, I don't know what, base that is on. I don't know what group they're looking at. Just some random, I don't know if they're even facts. What do we believe anymore, right?
And it's one of those things out there. I would love to see, what do they mean by linked? Because at this stage of age, when that person commits a crime, they take their blood and then they analyze, okay, is THC, the active component in marijuana, in their system? And, it can
that stays longer. Yes, you're right. So
exactly. It stays in your systems for a very long time. So you can't really, was that person when they were high committing the crime, or a week ago, did they go get high with their friends?
Was that a factor anyway? Just the fact that they are a person who likes to be intoxicated. Is that still could be a factor? The other one
it's not like alcohol where we can literally test your blood alcohol level and say you are this drunk kind of thing. And
there is a test for that coming up, though. That was another guy that was at the conference. Is that how are the cops able to address? Test. Yeah. So, I mean, we're not there yet, but it's like people are driving under the influence now.
Well, and me and my friends always talk about that would be like the $1 billion discovery if we could figure out, a way that police officers could use ways, because that is something that I do think is really important, that people who are very stoned should not be behind the wheel kind of thing.
Right. It scares me because, back in the day of the ragweed that I used to smoke, I was like, I am so high. And now it's like, how many? It was 4% THC now with the dabs or whatever. It's like 70%. I can't imagine how that would blow my mind.
Yeah.
What is that? It's just like, oh my gosh. It's got to be doing something, right? I mean, I think about all the changes in my brain chemistry over the years, and now that I'm on the right dosage of everything, that I have, stable brain chemistry, I can't imagine, what's happening to people with all these different elements, and all the people that are on opiates and driving. That is huge. There are so many. You figure, behind the wheel, there's possibly, in your day-to-day driving from, commute, there are people that you're driving by that are either stoned or on pain medicine. There's a lot of them. Or otherwise distracted with a phone. So it's kind of dangerous out there.
Yeah.
If you ask me.
Yeah, so maybe Elon Musk will save all of our problems with self-driving cars, but who knows? I mean, I at least with that problem, whether it's different substances, marijuana, alcohol, opiates, whatever it may be, I would love to just see the industry of like Uber and Lyft just get bigger and bigger, just to cut out these kind of things, these potentially harmful things, and just allow more people to get a job, more people to get home safe. But yeah. Well, so any last words of thought on I know we kind of at the end had a interesting conversation, not a little bit related to the mass shootings, but still a quality conversation nonetheless. But do you have any last words of thought on mass shootings, and how the media tries to connect them to mental illness, and just anything else you'd like to add?
Well, I always like to look at the silver lining in things. I can get upset listening because, like, as I'm looking at what they had to say out there about all this before we spoke, it was upsetting. Seeing like, okay, well, they think this, and they want to blame. It's like about finger pointing and protecting my thing. Don't let it be guns because I want my AK-47 because it's really cool. That's upsetting to see, the different trains of thought. But I think overall, the silver lining is if it points in the direction of, yes, we need to invest in more mental health, research and, services and treatment. And it is going that way. I think more of us have to be the silent successful, like you were so brave to do. That was like the first time I ever heard somebody up there on stage saying like, this is me and I'm bipolar. Not I'm bipolar. I have bipolar disorder. Then, the public has to know that we're people, we're all around you, we're doing fine, and we're not going to shoot you. They just have to get that through their heads.
Yeah.
The other thing that I'm working on is my second book, and it's going to be basically that, is giving the insight into think of it this way, not that way,
Yeah.
The working title
I'm sorry, go ahead, Diane.
The working title is Mind Shift. I'm still looking for the subtitle, so you can give me some suggestions. But it's basically a daily thing to ponder as, this is the way we used to think of things. This is the way you've been told. This is what society believes. Now think of it this way, kind of from our point of view, but our experience. This is what mental illness really is. What if you look at it this way? What if, you put yourself in the shoes of somebody who is homeless? That sort of thing. So, the bright side of all of this, of the shootings, that it does at least get our society talking about it and hopefully wanting to know the truth, wanting to talk to more people who deal with, just your everyday life situations and how they do well.
Yeah. And sorry for interrupting there, but what you said really made me think of this one. Are you on Instagram? I think you are.
Yeah, a little.
So the last Instagram post I made was this picture that I thought was just so powerful. It was this, I don't know her. She has a podcast out of New York, and I would like to get on her podcast. She's called, or her Instagram handle is schizophrenia.nyc, and it's a photo of her in New York holding up this poster that says, I have schizophrenia and I don't kill people. And I just thought that was so powerful and so fitting for everything that's going on. And that's how I kind of feel. Like, I have bipolar disorder, and I've never been in a fight in my life. I've never, it's just
that's
an unfair,
great message.
An unfair association. And, I think the more that people can understand that, okay, fine, we can say that there is something wrong with these people that commit mass murders, but it's, at least right now, it's not a diagnosable mental illness. Like being evil, being resentful, being, one of these kind of people is not in the DSM-5, and there's, at least not that I'm aware of, there's not a treatment. There's not really a pill. At least not an easy one, and we have to try to reach out though to these individuals, keep them from feeling isolated, understand why these individuals feel resentful, And, bringing it back to what we were talking about, like, I feel a lot of these individuals, and it's not really I feel, a lot of these individuals are young white males. And I think that a lot of it comes from, the world is changing. It's 2019. Even though our president, isn't necessarily a good reflection of this, the world is changing. And I think white men have to get used to the idea that our position in society is changing. And women are going to be taking more positions of power. People of color are going to be taking more positions of power. And I do think it is our time in history that we do need to kind of take a step back and kind of give up some of our control and power. And the sooner that white men can get used to that idea, I think the better society we'll live in.
Wow. That's profound.
Yeah.
I never really put that all together like that.
Yeah, I don't know.
True.
Yeah. That's
true. Well, thank you, Logan. That's big. I didn't really think of it that way.
Well, it's one of those weird things, like, a lot of these, when you see on images the mass murderers and how they first try to point the finger, I always take it, they're like you because they have a mental illness. It's like, no, they're like me because they're a white male. And at least I don't consider myself a resentful person. And, I am accepting of different cultures. I'm accepting of women having more power, women's rights, whatever it may be. And other men don't feel that way a lot of the time.
Yeah. That's sad.
Very. Very.
Yeah.
And so, one thing that if you ever want to come back on the show, that I would like to do is kind of, politics conversation leading up to 2020. And, the more we can kind of talk about that, and hopefully, who knows, maybe a woman or a person of color who gets in office, maybe can have some kind of trickle down effect, because I do think that, Donald Trump isn't necessarily helping these kind of issues with his racist rhetoric and his unaccepting attitude of different cultures and ethnicities and races. And so, I don't think he's making the problem any better. That being said, of course, Sandy Hook happened under Barack Obama's presidency. So it's not going to, of course, solve all the problems. But, I think we do need to start moving in the right direction.
Absolutely. And for people like you who have that kind of mindset, speaking out and being with people, gathering that and disseminating that attitude to men, this is not our right to be supreme or whatever that sort of thing is, that we are, I think, evolution of our society. What a great time to be alive, really, to see all these changes with mental health. And, it blows my mind that I'm old enough that, racism, the way things were black and white when I was young was crazy. The civil rights movement and all that. I mean, the way things have changed, I think oh, wow, it's so great now. It's not that great.
Yeah.
But compared to what I've seen, where I've been, we've got a long way to go, and I feel like we're part of all of that. So,
yeah,
I think it's a good, healthy conversation to have. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, Diane, that's an hour 10 minutes or so, hour 11 minutes. So, I think we should touch base again. Have you come back in? Maybe talk about the socioeconomic impacts of...
yes. Oh, I'd love to share that.
It sounds like you're very passionate about discussing, drug use. I think that would be a very interesting conversation to have and continue to explore further. And especially, I would like to even do that after... I will be doing one of my rotations at an addiction facility. And I might even want to go into addiction medicine. I don't know. I'm kind of, after my pediatric rotation, I considered, maybe pediatric psychiatry would be cool. But I've only done now a couple days working with adults. And that, I mean, I kind of like that you can have more in-depth kind of conversations and speak to them as a normal person because they're of age, of course. And then after this 2-week period, I finally get to start my real psychiatry rotation. So I'm super excited for that. I'll finally, and it's going to be an inpatient setting. So I think it's going to be a good experience for me. I'm looking forward to it.
And for them,
yeah,
they're going to really appreciate your insight and compassion and empathy, you know? I mean, wow, that is big. That is really big for them. I'm so happy that you're doing this.
Yeah. Well, thanks again. That is a wrap on this week's episode. Once again, thank you so much for tuning in. Diane and I are both authors. You can find both of our works on Amazon. Be sure to type in Diane Mintz, that's Diane, and then Mintz, M-I-N-T-Z. Or you can find my novel on Amazon as well. Type in Imperfect Balance or Logan Noon. Be sure to keep a lookout and give Diane a follow. Diane is working on a new upcoming book, and I am as well. I do have a book coming out with my mother, hopefully later this year. It's a children's book, so be sure to keep a lookout for that. And once again, thank you so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed this podcast, I would greatly appreciate you giving it a rating on whatever service you are listening. But really what I value more is if you enjoyed this podcast, tell one of your friends about it. I would greatly appreciate that. And once again, thank you for tuning in, and I really appreciate it.